Right. Are we ready? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Ben Shearon here, who has very kindly put today's event together at Tohoku University. And we know that Tohoku University has been doing some very interesting things with their extensive reading program, and Ben and Dan over here have been very much at the centre of that. And if you have a look at the very long text you made for your extensive reading program, it's very interesting. I've actually read the book through. I've read it. Today's event has been one that has been in the pipeline for quite a long time. We all know that extensive reading is one of those things at the moment in language learning that it's one of the only things you can find data, real data. Well, right? Is that right? And that it's showing students making great improvements through extensive reading. And today we have Ben to give a lecture first, and then after that we're going to introduce the way that other universities have been doing extensive reading in their schools. Corrie High School, Mark, Dominic, John are also going to introduce what they've been doing in their programs. So today I'm going to hand over totally to Ben, because this is your day and your event. So Corey, do we need announcements now?
No, we'll do announcements.
Okay, and thank you all for coming today. It's out of our normal area, and I'm very glad to see so many of you have turned up today, because we were a bit worried that, well, Ben, you were worried too, weren't you, that maybe you'd go, oh, it's Tohoku University. That's great, this is a fantastic turnout. Thank you very much. So over to you, Ben.
Right, so I'd also like to thank Jalt for organising this for us. It's a great chance to show off a little bit. And I'd like to thank Mr. Yondawa as well for hosting us. So he's in charge of the library. Thank you very much. As a side note to that, on the second floor we have the Reader's Corner, which is our graded reader collection. So if you'd like to go and have a look at that in the break, or at the end after we've finished on the way back down. The only thing is, the university is having tests at the moment. You've probably seen the nervous looking students around, so if you could try and be quiet once you step outside the door, that'd be really helpful as well. So today, I'd just like to give you an overview of the program. The first thing, I'm going to talk about designing extensive reading programs in a general way. I'm going to try not to talk about our specific program too much. After that, we're going to have 5 presenters from different places who will talk about their own programs. And in an attempt to make this easy to compare, we've got a list of questions that each presenter will try to answer. We'll go over that a bit later. So that'll be about 10 minutes each, so the second hour. Once that's finished, we'll probably have a short break for about 10-15 minutes, depending on where the clock's got to. And at the end, we'll have a panel kind of discussion. I'm hoping that the audience will have lots of questions, right? But just in case, I've got a few myself as well. So I'll be kind of chairing that at the end. Okay? So I'd like to ask for today, if you have a question that is very specific, and can be answered in about 10 seconds, please ask immediately. Right? If you want to know how many students there are, or you didn't catch something, or something like that, please ask immediately. If you have a more complicated question, please just make a note of it at the bottom here, and please ask it during the final panel session, just to keep things moving smoothly. I'm quite happy today. We are not going to be using any slides. So kind of push back against PowerPoint today. Yeah. I'm also a bit worried because I haven't presented without slides for about 5 years. So forgive me if I'm a bit rusty here. So, just before we start, I hope you have 2 things. So one is this handout for my talk, and the other is the Dog University Extensive Reading Handbook, which is bilingual. Please take one. This is probably more important right now, because we'll be using it for this talk. We don't want to take these handbooks back. So if you'd like to take a second copy at the end of the day, please feel free to give it to a colleague or something. That would be great. Okay, so extensive reading program design. Before starting about this, I'd like to talk about two things. And the first is that I think there's three really important factors for extensive reading programs. Probably the most important is the learner motivation and interest. Basically, if you have that, actually nothing else really matters, right? That's the key. The second is instructor skill. And the nice thing about instructor skill is that it can increase learner motivation. If you are a very skilled and knowledgeable teacher and you understand your students and you can communicate with them, you can definitely boost their motivation. And the third element is the program. And the nice thing about the program is that the program can boost instructor skill if it's designed well. And it can also boost learner motivation. And the only thing we actually control is the program. So from an administration point of view, from a leadership point of view, the program's probably where you should put most of your energy. Okay. And that will loop into the other factors. And the other thing that I'd like to mention just now at the beginning is that I think limitations are actually a blessing in disguise for this. Thinking back to when I started working here, when I started trying to introduce extensive reading here, my vision of what I wanted was completely different to how it's turned out. And how it's turned out, I think, is probably much more effective than what I wanted to do at the beginning. And it's the limitations that shaped the program that came out. So starting an extensive reading program or developing an extensive reading program, it's really frustrating. And it can often seem like there's only barriers and walls everywhere. But in fact, if you persist and get through that, the barriers and the walls actually help shape your program so it's more effective. So just please keep that in mind as we go through. Especially once Dan introduces our program, you might think, oh, well, you've got everything going for you. But, 4 years ago, we really didn't. There was nothing at all. And it's all kind of come together recently. Okay, so I've got these 9 different elements of a program here. And I'm hoping to talk about each one for about 4 minutes. 4 minutes or so each. So it's going to be quite short. And hopefully you'll have some questions or you'll have some maybe comments even to make. So we can do that at the end in the panel session. So the first thing I think is goals. Even before you start designing a program, you have to have a goal in mind. What's the purpose of the program? What do you want to do with the program? And just to give you an example, for us, we have 4 goals and then a main goal. Or rather, 1 main goal and 4 sub-goals, as it were. And the main goal for us, the only real purpose of the program, is to create a reading habit in English in the students. So grades and scores and homework and teaching is all irrelevant. My goal is that the students will continue reading after they finish the class, after they finish university, and for the rest of their life. That's my goal. Now, what's the success rate going to be? Personally, I think if I can reach 1 student and make that change, then that for me is enough. That's enough of a success. Obviously, I'm hoping it's more than that, but I don't think we're going to get everybody in that. The sub-goals, which is what we introduce to the students, is we want students to increase their reading speed, because that's probably the biggest limitation on Japanese students. They've got grammar knowledge, they've got vocabulary knowledge, but what they don't have is reading speed and what I call reading stamina, which is the ability to read longer texts without getting tired. For me in Japanese, I find, if I read for more than 5 or 10 minutes, I get sleepy, I get tired, because it's a real mental effort to read in a foreign language. And most students have never read anything longer than 1 page. Right? In their textbooks, in their studies so far, they concentrate on that kind of thing. So for the students to build up their stamina is really, really important. I hope the students will increase their vocabulary and their grammar knowledge, whether it's discrete or non-discrete, whether they're thinking about it or not. I hope that the students will enjoy reading as well. And I hope that the students will be able to talk about and write about what they've read. Just kind of sub-goal there that we do. And the key is, I tell the students these goals right at the beginning. The first thing in the first class, the goals of this class are these. This is what I hope you to get out of it. And we repeat that. So you're not only at the beginning, but halfway through the course and at the end of the course. Just to keep the students focused on the bigger picture, as it were. The other thing I do with goals is I say, look, obviously you care about your grade. Obviously the university cares about your grade, and that's why we have these certain way of doing things. But at the end of the day, the grade really doesn't matter. I don't think it matters. What matters is whether you get better at English, whether you get useful skills that you can use for the rest of your life, whether you enjoy doing this activity. And I hope the students get some sense of that. I think that the teacher's expectations really make a difference to the students. So if you say that what you care about, hopefully the students will care about that as well. Yeah.
Can I get some context, please? I'm not familiar with your program, so can you tell me what level students you're teaching and whether it's required, not required, how many students, that kind of thing?
So they're pretty good students. I mean, it's a national university, it's fairly hard to get into. Their English is good, on paper. They're motivated. Most of them, about 97, 98%, say that English is very important for them. The classes are compulsory for all students. What's the one?
At what level?
At what level?
Are they is it a freshman class? Is it
Oh yeah, first year students,
Okay.
mostly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that's goals, right? The next thing to think about is the environment you find yourself in. When I came in, I wanted to have a language centre. That was my dream. So we'd have a special room, a special building, where we can host all these resources and so on. And that hasn't been possible. Okay, there's no space for that, there's no support for that at the moment. So what we've ended up with is we've been able to use the library, which has been a fantastic resource for us. And also, we've been able to convert some of the classrooms by putting cabinets, lockable cabinets in the classroom. Very small footprint. They don't really get in the way, but we've got certain classrooms that have cabinets full of books in them. And that's come about through negotiating. Right? That came out, that was in the 4th year of the program. We managed to get that. So the environment makes a difference. What kind of classroom do you have? Is it desks? Is it an amphitheatre? This is going to limit what kind of activities you can do with the class. Also, how easy is it for students to get to the books? One thing that we've always found necessary is making sure that the students can get their hands on books easily. The greater the effort required to get a book, the less chance that they're going to do it. Right? You need to remove these barriers from there. So, for example, getting the students to come to the library for the first time was the biggest gap for us. especially for the first year students, because they didn't know where the library was, they might not know how to use it, etc., etc. So realizing that this was a problem and basically forcing the students to come here for the first time was the key. And of course, once they've done it once, then they have to come back to return the books, which makes it easy to get the next one, and so on. We started off this cycle here. But basically being very aware of the environment is key when you're designing the program. Actually, let me jump back. I might have skipped something here. So before we go on to resources, I'd like to define 3 terms. So extensive reading itself, as well as program, and of course design. So for me, extensive reading is, I see it being, I think it's often misused, especially in Japan, the term itself. Right, so for me, extensive reading is reading a lot. So what is a lot? It probably varies according to your situation, but it is at least several 100,000 words of English. So the only place I've seen actual numbers is from a guy called Hitoshi Nishizawa, who's at Kosen. And he sets out kind of 3 points that are significant. So he says that after reading 100,000 words of Easy English, students tend to stop translating in their head. So they start actually getting the meaning from the English as opposed to deconstructing things.
Just a question.
Yeah.
How does he know that?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
That's what it says in his, you can look it up.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I just wondered if you...
I think it's probably feedback from the students.
Yeah, it just strikes me as a very difficult thing to sort of assess or analyse.
And the second point was 300,000 words, where he said that his students' test scores tended to go up.
Yeah.
Right. Before that, there wasn't really a visible difference in standardized tests. Nishizawa. He publishes in English as well as Japanese, so if you look for extensive reading of Nishizawa, you can get his papers. And his third one was, he said that 3 million words. And basically in their program, they had like a 7-year program or a 9-year program. They've got a high school and integrated technical colleges. So they said students that read 3 million words showed the same gains as students that spent a year in America studying. And obviously on standardized tests, so obviously there's going to be variations in there. But and this kind of level of reading is quite rare, I think. It's becoming less so. I've seen more and more, I've met more and more teachers that have large volume programs. But the problem is that there's also quite a few programs that call themselves extensive reading, but are not. So I might characterize them as, for example, using graded readers. Right. Now obviously using graded readers is great, you know, the students have a chance at succeeding at reading, but if you read 5 books in a semester, that's not extensive reading. You know, it's experiencing graded reading, but it's not extensive. There's not enough volume in that. Lots of our students, we give them a survey at the end of the semester. And one of the questions is, have you done extensive reading before? And lots of the, well, maybe a third of the students said, yes, we did it in high school. So I thought, that seems a bit strange. That doesn't gel with my, so I asked a few people, you know, so you did extensive reading in high school, what did you do? Oh, we read a book over the summer holiday. Right, so they've read a graded reader, but I wouldn't say they did an extensive reading program. There wasn't enough volume involved. So that's one key thing here. So extensive reading is reading a lot. And the program, for me, is everything. So it's from the curriculum, to the resources, to the buildings, to the staff, to what kind of grades you're allowed to give students, and that kind of things.
I want to interrupt because I'm a little bit hazy on this. Could you roll back just a little bit? Did you start off with a reading program or reading class? Or, you know, I'm a little bit confused about how you make the jump from no program to a program. of extensive
Yeah,
reading?
I started with a class, my class,
Okay.
and then I was lucky enough.
Which was designated as what? I mean, the title of the class that you had was what? When you did that?
It was a reading class.
Okay.
Called English reading.
Okay, there you go, that's what I was getting, okay.
And then after a couple of years, I got some colleagues to join in, and that's where we are now. We're not a compulsory element at Torquay University, but we have 20 classes next year doing the same program across the board.
A range of majors or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The way the system works here, we don't have English majors. We teach everybody. This is the kind of general curriculum. So all the first and second year students learn English. And the last thing is design. So if you look at industry, design has kind of two elements. Right. The first is usability. So does it make it easy and fun to use? And the other is the kind of aesthetic element, so simplicity and beauty, as it were. And for me, working on the program, I'm trying to do both. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to use, and also simple and elegant in a way. So hopefully Dan will be able to introduce some of the elegance that we were trying to get to. Okay, so resources next. So moving on to, going back to these. Resources for me was, the biggest one was funding. There was no funding when we started, and it's very hard to start off because the problem with extensive reading is that you do need things to read. And I think actually extensive reading it's one of the most cost-effective programs. If you compare it to computers, which is the other kind of thing that universities tend to go for, they say, oh, let's get a computer lab, let's get software. Extensive reading much cheaper, really. Getting a library, and it's a one-off cost. You can use it for probably 5-10 years, depending on how quickly the books degrade. But that initial investment is considerable. When I started out, I used my own research funds to buy books. And I also asked the students to buy books and then donate them. So it's a bit cheeky, it's like mugging the students in a way, isn't it? I'm going to force you to buy books, then I'm going to ask very nicely for you to give them to me. Well, yeah, because you can't say you have to give it to me, because then you get in trouble with the administration. But I found about 70% of students did donate the books. So we had them write their names in it, you know, donated by so-and-so, so their cohort can see them and stuff like that. So, and that worked for a few years, 2 or 3 years.
Just curious, how'd you get the logistics? Did you just send them down to Madison from the Vice Team or?
Yeah. Well, we're lucky. Our bookstore, the bookstore manager was quite into graded readers as well.
So they just went and bought whatever was there.
I gave them guidelines, rough guidelines, but yeah, it was up to them. You know, buy a book that you like and share them. We made a class set. By the second or third year, we had enough, so we could stop doing that. Obviously, it's not ideal, but if you don't have any other option, it's quite good. If you think of an English textbook, probably costs 2,000 or 3,000 yen for the students. So if you don't have a textbook, you just say, right, buy 2 graded readers instead. They're actually much better off than they would be if they were buying, say, a standard textbook. And then there's obviously institutional funds and library funds. The library really is a key partner, I think, for extensive reading. And we found it's such a win-win situation with the library. Because the library, their goal is to get people into the library and using the library, borrowing books, coming in. That's where their funding comes from. We are in a position where we can force our students to come here. And even with the limited numbers that we've had, having our students come into the library and use it made such a difference that the library came to me and said, what can we give you, because we love what's happening here. Right? So it was very unexpected when that happened. So the way we started out, the library has a program here where staff can ask for books to be bought. So I asked them to buy some extensive readers, not a huge amount, but some. And then the students use them. And then after that first year, we had much more freedom. So basically buy whatever you want. We'll buy stuff for you. So the library is a key place to go. The other good thing about libraries is that they'll look after the books for you. One thing is obviously the logistics of lending books to students and getting them back again and storing them and packaging them and so on. And for a long time I did that myself. So I had a daisha, a cart, with some plastic boxes full of books. I think I was notorious on this campus because I had my 10 boxes of swaying books going through the corridor. But the library will do that for you. So you don't need to have that if you can do that. And of course there's institutional funding. So once you're established, you can ask for grants. There's often money lying around somewhere. Now the key thing about budgets that I have learnt to my dismay this week. So this week I went to the library and said, oh, we need loads more books next year. And they said, oh, we don't have any funding left because it's the end of the year. So if you're going to do anything with budgets and funding, it should be towards the beginning of the year or the middle of the year. If you leave it too late, it doesn't matter how favoured your status is, there is no money. So that's something I learned at my peril. So that's resources. And after this, basically, we're going to move on to classes and instruction kind of section. And explanation is probably the most important part. So for me, the extensive reading program depends on the first class. So if you get the first class right, if you do a good job explaining what the program is, what the goals are, what you expect the students to do, what they will get out of it, then the program will go very well. If you don't, then you're going to struggle. Right? If that first orientation, explanation, doesn't go well, then it's much harder to get student buy-in. You get student pushback. Especially for our program, we've structured it so that all the students have to start reading easy books. And I found for the first year or so, I got a significant minority of students who were annoyed. So why are we reading these? You know, this is childish and easy and insulting. You know, I'm a Tohoku University student. Because I hadn't explained it properly. I hadn't explained why, you know, and what the purpose was and what they were going to see from this. So that first explanation is key to think. If you get it right, one thing I've found recently is that the students have been reporting back that we've been meeting the goals. You know, oh, my reading speed has improved. You know, I'm finding it easier to read. And this is unsolicited, solicited feedback, but I wasn't asking about that specific thing. So the students have noticed the things that we explained to them. So that first explanation is very, very important, I think. The other thing is that I try to sell the program. So I talk about my own experiences of reading in French, or in German, or in Japanese, which have really helped me linguistically. And just giving those kind of examples to the students, it gives them a model, and it shows them the kind of possibilities here. So it's not just a class, this isn't about this semester. You know, it's about you and basically giving you the chance to get really good at English over the long term. I'm just trying to get that through to students. I bring in books in Japanese that I've read or have been reading and say, look, this is the kind of thing I'm trying to read now, and so on. Some of them have read the same books. It's just trying to get that connection and show them that reading is something more than, you know, another English class. Right, in terms of classes, what to do in class, I think, is a key thing here. Now, the one thing I'd say here is that you must do reading in the class. So silent reading. Silent sustained reading. Basically. The students read whatever they're reading at the time. But in the class, you take some amount of time and you say, right, this is reading time, please read. And you don't really do anything else in that time. Now, how much time to take? Obviously, this is going to depend. When I started doing extensive reading, I was a part-time teacher at Miyagi Kyokudai. So I used to bring in bags of books. I couldn't lend the books to the students because I didn't have any way of tracking that. It wasn't a reading class. So I couldn't spend a huge amount of time doing reading. So we did 15 minutes of silent sustained reading in the class. And I think it was helpful. It was interesting for the students. They got that sense of satisfaction. The thing that always gets me with Japanese students is that for most of them, they've never read a book in English. They've never read something for the sake of reading. And that first experience of saying, oh, I read the book and it was interesting and it was easy and I finished. That's a huge feeling there of satisfaction. So just giving the students that in itself would be enough. But now what we do, because we do have reading classes, I started off doing the whole class. So 80 minutes of reading. Which I now think is too much. Not because it's a waste of time. I think reading is probably the most useful thing students can do with their time. But because of the stamina issue, I find students really can't concentrate for that long. Right? 80 minutes is just a bit too much. So we kind of played around with the timing, between about 30 minutes and I think now basically 30 to 45 minutes is about right. Half the class. So the students spend a third to half the class reading. They've got books, they bring books with them, and they just read silently for that time. Now this is pretty good for the teacher. It gives you time to do admin. Like for our program at least, there's quite a bit of admin involved, checking, reading records and things like that. So that reading time allows you to do admin. It allows you to talk to students one-on-one if you need to, or if you can, and it allows you to read books as well. So I think it's really important that the reading instructor has read, if not all, then at least a few of the graded readings. You need to know what's in them so that you can talk to students about them. You can recommend books to students, things like that. And also just to be seen reading them by the students is quite useful. So that's what we do with the classes. Now, what to do with the rest of the time?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Quick question. So, have you ever set goals, external goals on students, or do you leave it completely up to them to?
We have word count goals,
Okay.
but Dan will talk about that.
Okay.
Where was I?
Sorry.
So, what else to do in the class? One thing I find is that students really appreciate the chance to talk to each other about books, which surprised me actually. I didn't think they'd be into it, but constantly on our feedback, it's one of the most popular things we do. So at the beginning of the class for us, or at least for me in my classes, I assign the students to pairs and have them introduce books to each other. Now we've structured this. It used to be free form, but we found that the weaker students weren't able to do it effectively if it was free form, and sometimes it was awkward. So what we've done now is we made a list of questions. So the students have a standard list of questions to go through. They make a pair. One student asks the questions, the other student answers the questions about their book, and then they switch. They do 5 minutes each.
And are they doing this in English?
Yes. Yes. I don't think it's a problem for lower level students to do it in Japanese or in their native language, but for us they can, so we encourage them to do it in English.
And your students are Japanese, they're not international students, for example?
Yeah, 95%. We have a couple, and they join in. So the speaking is very popular. Now another thing we do is we have the students write book reports or reading reports about their reading, and until recently we've done that outside of class. It was part of their homework. But this semester, for a couple of reasons, we've changed that, and now we have them write them in the class as a timed writing exercise. And for me that's working out better, because it reduces the hassle. Basically, the problem with book reports is that it can be a hassle. It's difficult, it's time consuming. If you give it for homework, some students will spend far too much time on it. And basically doing it in class gets rid of all of this. So it's a set time, they do it in class, they can't go over that time. It reduces the potential for irregularities, which is why we made the change actually. And it just worked out very, very well. Another thing we do is timed reading exercises, which is very nice because for a lot of students they can see their time getting shorter. They can see themselves reading faster, which increases buy-in into the program. So we said to them at the beginning, we want your reading speed to increase. Their reading speed does increase, and therefore it gives us more kind of authority, as it were.
Could you explain what you mean by timed reading?
Timed reading is basically reading passages of a certain length, timing yourself, and then maybe doing comprehension questions. There's a few. There's a textbook series by Paul Nation called Reading for Speed and Fluency. It's quite nice. And we use something from America. It's an American textbook. Do you remember the name? Timed Readings in something.
Timed readings plus.
And that's amazing. That's like there's about 80 books in the series, right? Like 10 levels across.
With different content.
But basically what happens is the students will read a short passage, time themselves, all the passages are the same length and hopefully the same difficulty. And so they'll just track that on a graph across the semester. So that's what we do in class, basically. Half reading, half other stuff. Now, tracking. Tracking is basically measuring what the students are doing and how much you want to do and in what form you want to do it is going to depend on your circumstances. I don't think there's one best way to do this. Generally speaking, I think there's probably about 4 different reasons you track students. The first is to give them a grade, if you have to give them a grade. The second is for their own motivation. So I find if I'm doing something and I keep track of my progress, that's inherently motivating, right? You want to reach the goal and you're happy that you finished a certain amount. Another thing might be for research purposes, if you want to do some research about your students and so on. And the fourth one is admin. So maybe the administration wants to see what you're doing with your classes. And actually, you can reach all of these with the same tracking systems. So all 4 of these goals can be reached. Basically, I think there's 2 ways to track, more or less. There's online systems, like if you know mReader or Moodle Reader, which is basically an online quizzing system, which includes, so basically the students read a book, they take a short quiz. If they pass the quiz, they're believed to have read the book, and they get that many words and so on, sort of thing. We don't use online tracking. We found it difficult to match it to our system. So we have student reading reports each week where they write what they've read, and we have the writing element, which is a bit of a check on that, see if they've done it or not. In terms of specifically tracking, you can track reading time. So how many minutes did you read? You can track number of books. How many books did you read in the semester? You can track pages, or you can track words. And I've tried all of these actually throughout the years, and I found that probably the fairest one is words, tracking word counts. So how many words did you read? If you finish this book, it has so many words in it, count them up. And this is fair because it allows you to assess different levels in the same way. So for example, the lowest level of graded reader might have 400 words in it, 500 words in one book. The highest level will have 30,000. So if you're counting books, and your students are trying to game the system, which books are they going to read? Right? I had that a lot in my first year. I was tracking books, and the students were actually going through the books going, okay, which is the shortest book? Where is it? And obviously the same problem with pages, right? Some books have pictures in them, some books don't, and so on. So word counts was the best way I found for this. I think tracking reading time, if you're working with a smaller group, or you're not in as grade intensive an environment as we are here, then maybe tracking reading time might be the fairest way to measure kind of achievement. Because obviously some students read much faster than others. But we do the timed reading exercises, and we find that students vary between about 80 words a minute, which is very, very slow, all the way up to 300, 400, 500 words a minute. So if you're giving them a grade based on their word count, then the slow readers are definitely being penalised. So that's one flaw in the way we track word counts. The nice thing about tracking word counts is it does actually reflect effort. We've had feedback from the students in their final essays that says, I like this class because it really does grade you based on your effort, not on your ability. So it doesn't matter if you're good at English or not. If you put in time, you'll get a good grade in this class. So I really appreciated that. So that's tracking. Next one is similar, so feedback. So hopefully your tracking system will provide feedback to the students. Right? For our students, they fill in their reading record each week. And just by getting that, they can see what their progress is like. That's a kind of feedback built into the system. Another thing we do is we grade the reading sheets each week and give them back the next week. It's very quick turnaround there. Actually what we do is we collect them, we scan them, so that we've got them if we need them, if something comes up, and then we return the papers the next week. The other aspect of feedback is getting feedback from the students. Right? So I used to get feedback weekly from students. We had notebooks where the students would write comments each week and so on, but I found that was too time consuming. Once it got beyond one class, 2 classes, it just got too much for me. So now, what we do is we have an exit survey at the end of the semester. So the students answer questions about the class, about their reading, about their impressions and so on. We get that. We've been doing that for 3 years. 3 years now. So this goes back. We've got 7 of these. The data is more or less similar throughout there. The other thing is we've had the students write essays in the final class. So for about 30 minutes, short essay, 1 page, about the class, your impressions of the class, the books you read, and so on. And these have been really fantastic in terms of the comments we've got. They say things like, when I started, I really wasn't into this at all, but then I noticed that it was getting easier to read, and I had a chance to read, and normally I don't have time, but being forced to read was wonderful. And just positive comments. Even the students who said, this class took too much time, but it was useful for me. So really fantastic kind of feedback there. And also a few comments that were helpful. You know, things like, you know, I wanted to do this, or I thought this was a bit off. And that's really, really helpful for us to see where the problems are there. Okay, exit strategies. Now, this is something that we don't do at the moment. We don't have an exit strategy. In fact, I talked to Dan about this last week. That's it. Where I said, okay, so let's make exit strategy. So basically, what happens when the class finishes? So, last class, thanks guys, it's been great. See you, have a nice life. For us especially, we have 1 semester classes only. So we don't have the full year to you know, indoctrinate the students properly. We can just do it for 1 semester. So what happens after that? You know, I've got my speech, which is, you know, you guys have worked so hard and you've made great progress. You've got to here. And if you stop, then, you know, you're going to gradually decline back to 0. But if you continue, even a little, you don't have to do the same volume. You can keep that level, you know, just by reading a book a week or every 2 weeks and so on. So I've got my speech, but I don't know how much that does. So the students on the surveys, most of them say they want to continue reading. They're planning to continue reading, but we'll see. So we are going to try and make something to help them with that, which is going to be, haven't quite got it straight in our minds. We're going to start that next semester. But basically have an exit thing where we give them a leaflet or a pamphlet, and basically it's the image that we've got at the moment is maybe have this 1,000,000-word challenge. Right? So in our class they've read 2, 3, 400,000 words. We say, look, try and get to 1,000,000 now. You know, give them a goal, something specific. You know, write something, and then give them the tracking sheet to get there. So fill in your starting point, see if you can get to 1,000,000 words. Continue going to the library and so on. So I don't know. We'll see. See if it's effective. See if it works. But I think something there is necessary. Otherwise, it really was a little bit pointless, you know, getting them to here and having them stop. So anything that encourages that. And the last thing, I kind of touched on this briefly, but Kaizen, which is basically continuous improvement of processes. Right? Japanese companies are very famous for this. It was a big thing in the 80s, wasn't it? Where America was like, we must do Kaizen as well. But basically, our program really does work on this principle. So we have a problem, we make a change to fix the problem, and the program improves. Just to give you an example, if you look at our booklet, so this came out last year in March. Came out in March last year. We've had 2 major upgrades to the program since this. So what we're doing now is not what's in this book. It's evolved since then. And I think that's really, really important in terms of getting a quality program going. Just to give you an example, this semester I had a student give me a book report. And I read it, and really unlucky for this student because it was an excellent book report, wonderful. It's about a book called "Leaving Microsoft to Change the World." Don't know if you've read it. Basically, one of the Microsoft executives gave up his job, went to Nepal, tried to build schools, and you know, dedicated his life to charity instead of making money. And this book report was wonderful. You know, it's like, oh, I wish I could be like this person, you know, and he went through so much, and he lost his girlfriend, he lost his job, he lost his money, but he did it all for a purpose, and blah, 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 and I wish I could do that too. Only problem was, I read the same book report 2 years ago, written by another student, and I remembered this. I went back and found it on my computer in my files, and I said, okay, so this is obviously it. I was a bit disillusioned at this point. I was like, wow, this isn't great, is it, that they're being recycled? And basically the reason that was happening is because we were returning the book reports. So we'd collect them, we'd check them, we'd give them a grade, and we'd give them back. So as a result of that, we stopped returning the book reports, and we started writing them in class as opposed to writing them for homework. But it turns out that writing them in class is better, not just for addressing cheating, but also in terms of the kind kind of burden on the students and so on. So it's been a really positive change based on that. And it's things like this. We've changed the word count slightly. So we used to have certain word count targets, and we've adjusted them to make them a little bit more user-friendly. Just these really small changes, but continuously happening. And I think the reason this has happened is because there's two people working on this. So it's really important to have somebody to bounce ideas off, to coordinate with, to commiserate with, and so on. So if you are running a program or starting a program or thinking about a program, it's really helpful to have people with you, right? Whether it's a colleague or someone in another university and so on. So I really encourage you to work with someone on this. All right, we've got 5 minutes for questions. Yes?
So with resources, have you tried going through Kahindi?
What, my research with me?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, applying to Monbouchot for a grant.
I've applied a couple of times and didn't get it. So
Yeah,
the problem we got back is that it's not to build resources; it's to investigate things. So they said we're not eligible because we're trying to buy things for the university. So that's the feedback I got from that. So
You'd have to turn it around.
spin it somehow, you know.
Yeah, also, levels, you haven't mentioned really, I suppose you can do that later, but,
Yeah, I think Dan's going to talk about that.
yeah, how you address levels for students, okay. And also the language that you're using in the classes, it's mostly in English that you're doing?
I generally speak only English, but I'll talk to students in Japanese if they need help afterwards or whatever. The one big difference is that recently we've been making handbooks for the students. They explain the program, explain everything, and they're bilingual. So the students have this bilingual resource.
I have one final question is that with a lot of extensive reading programs, the main problem is actually getting the students to do it. I mean, doing it in class is a really good idea. I really think that's good, but seems to be a big problem. How do you motivate people to actually do it? We all know it works, but you've got to do it. You've got to do this number of words, and how do you actually get people to do that? And like this exit strategy thing as well, I was wondering if you can give us some ideas of the kind of things that you're telling the students in order to try to encourage them to actually take this on board.
Right, I think there's two parts to that. One is the kind of intrinsic motivation. Like most of our students think English is important, they want to get better at it. They have specific goals, like, you know, they in the third year they're going to have to use English or whatever. So we tie into that, we say this is an effective way to do that. The other thing is their grade is 80% based on their reading, so the word counts and so on. So for these students, that's quite a big motivator.
Yeah, actually, I'm really addressing this for a lot of other people who are not in your fortunate position of having highly motivated students. So do you have any kind of suggestions?
Well, I've also done extensive reading in an Eikaiwa setting with students that, you know, range from not motivated to. The thing is, I don't think you can force 100% of the students to do something, right? You can give them the chance, the opportunity, you can introduce it and say, this is really good, I really want you to do it, and follow up. But in the Eikaiwa setting, yeah, half the students don't do it, basically. And that's fine, you know, it's their choice, basically. And half of them do. So for me, the half of them that do is the success, in a way. And the others, I mean, you keep pushing them, you know, you keep saying, oh, how was that book that you didn't read this time? But at the end of the day, it's up to them. You know, extensive reading is a self-study method, basically.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the material that you are using. You say books, and it means books by levels.
Yeah, graded readings.
But did you think about the possibility of using research articles, for example? I don't know. I use with my students. They read in English, and we have the subject in Japanese, but they read in English because most of the material now is in English. It in some way it helps them to keep track of their own subject, to learn what they are studying now, and at the same time learning English. I don't know if to prove that, because in some way it can help for motivation in the future to keep words
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah, this program, it's basically an introductory program. It's a remedial program. So we're trying to get the students up to, you know, we're addressing a gap which they haven't read, a volume of English. So for that purpose, I'm not sure research articles meets that need. However, we have found that students like a variety of different topics, and that we found that the engineering students and the science students really like reading non-fiction, especially in their topic areas. You know, it's not a research article by any means. It's a book, a simple book about, you know, the weather or geology. But taking their knowledge and mapping it to the English words is really, so that's a really important point, having a range of resources for the students to read.
One aspect of reading, I'm wondering if you tried to incorporate reading and recording. In other words, have students read, record themselves, audit their own recordings later. Have you introduced that aspect at all?
Well, the thing there is that the difference between reading and reading aloud, which are very different skills. And basically, we're trying to speed up the students, and so I think that would be taking them in the other direction. So it's focusing on you know, words and pronunciation and so on. So I've had students say, you know, how about reading aloud? Can we do that? Because it's a useful.
Well, some people do read aloud to themselves when they're self-reading. I mean, they're, you know.
Right. But as a reader, that's a behaviour that you want to stop in a way, because it slows you down. You know, because you speak at 80 words, 100 words a minute, and you read hopefully at 300-400. You know, 3-4 times the speed. So I generally say to students that you can read aloud. It's good for your pronunciation and so on, but not too much. You know,
So
try and do
it's
most of the silent
not
reading.
part of the program. Not something.
It's
you
speaking,
think about
not reading.
Yeah. Okay.
Mark, you had a question?
Well, I was just gonna, when you were mentioning Kiowa, when years and years ago I taught in a Kiowa where we had extensive reading, and we used a lot of it like, just to set the school they were going to apart, because most Kiowa doesn't bother with this. And so it's kind of status appeal. You come here, we do this, because you're a serious student. And it was kind of, that was just an appeal we tried to pitch,
Yeah.
and it worked for some.
Yeah.
Do you use only credit readers or do you use any authentic materials?
What I say to the students is, if you finish our program, so we have 5 levels. If you finish the 5th level, you can read any book you want in English as part of the class. 3 students are finished. It's 700,000 words in one semester, so it's a big goal. But 3 students are finished, and they've gone on to read, you know, English general books or novels. But generally speaking, we want to go through this graduated levels, because when I started out, I let them choose their level. And a lot of the students would go too high, so they didn't have the speed, the reading speed, they didn't have the stamina to read at that level, so they went really slowly. And I found by forcing everyone to go through the easy books, people find their level very quickly. So if they're a good reader, they speed through the levels. If they're a slow reader, they get to the right place. So I think for our programming, one semester, starting from scratch, there's not a huge place for authentic materials.
Sorry, another question. So are you, this course that you do then, every student who comes to Torp University does this course?
Everyone takes the class, but at the moment only about a third of the teachers teaching the classes are using this program.
Do the students opt to take the extensive reading, or it's just whatever they're?
Whoever they're assigned
So
to.
this is reading English. Every student takes the class reading English, and only
Some of the
teachers
teachers
who are
choose to do this.
okay.
So we're hoping to expand that number. But again, the other problem is the teachers really have to be on board. So we've had a couple of teachers try it who weren't really into it, didn't really understand it, and weren't able to guide the students appropriately. So I think mandating it across the board is quite dangerous in a way. You're going to end up with teachers that, you know, going to mangle the program.
Okay, I was doing some paperwork, so you may have mentioned it. So there was about the graded readers, how, or the levels, how do you do that? Is it graded readers, actually graded readers,
Yep.
or?
Yep.
So it's graded readers.
Graded readers,
Okay.
and we've got 5 difficulty levels.
The ones I've seen in Japan, I don't know where you're getting these, but the ones I've seen in Japan, it'll have like a word count, but that doesn't seem to exactly relate to difficulty of words.
Ah, yeah.
I don't know how that's.
You should
using
probably
words,
have a
so-
look. Have a look
Oh,
at the
okay.
reader's corner before you go. And
Oh, that's here or something, we can see the book?
second floor.
Okay, thanks.
That'll answer that question
Okay.
better than I can.
Okay, okay.
Okay, I think we're going to have to stop here just to keep things moving. We are going to have this panel discussion thing at the end so we can continue talking about this. So, thank you very much. Let's move on to individual.